All right. Welcome to the Narrative Mindset Podcast. I'm your host, Gerald Tab. I appreciate you for tuning in to my podcast. If this is your first time, I really appreciate it if when you get time, go back and view previous episodes, uh, just starting out so you can get a, a feel for the podcast. Nothing over the top, but go back and view other episodes to get the feel of the podcast. So I'm going to start here by I'll give you just a basic idea of who I am. I'm 52 years old. I live in Detroit, Michigan. I'm a rideshare driver, and I moved here. I'm ambitious, definitely a parent, and in I guess you call it uh, what do they call it? The side hustle business. Not a quitter. I take everything that the most famous people, what they say, you never give up. Keep trying, keep trying, keep trying, keep trying. I've tried a lot of things. This is another avenue. You try something, it doesn't work, try something else. That doesn't work. Keep trying and 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 trying. And eventually, something will work and, you'll, gain traction and, something will come out of it. So this is another avenue for that. And, I had another podcast with the same name, but I scrapped it because it was all AI, whole AI voice, everything like that. And I said, I didn't really want to, uh, get so far. I think I was like 57 episodes in, and I didn't really want to get too far into it. And then they change a rule in which they're doing, change a rule for AI. And all of a sudden I got all this work that I've done and it just goes down the drain. So, that was a thought of mine because the ultimate goal is for whatever I do to turn into a business and generate an income. So I didn't want to get, 150 episodes down the road and they come up with a rule saying, oh, well, if this is artificial intelligence, then you're only going to get, 2 cents on a view. So then it's like, now I'm all that work is gone down the drain, in which I would, if that did happen, I would still, keep going, but I just didn't want that to happen. So, I decided to scrap it and just come back with another podcast uh, that was more me, and just a genuine, you know, my genuine voice, my genuine, uh, rhythm, no, you know, reading stories or anything like that, because I want it to be organic so that you can, get a feel of who I am and, hopefully, hopefully uh, engulf in some of my stories that I bring up. And I call it I came up with the name, the narrative mindset, because I was looking for a podcast name. And, the podcast area is really, really saturated. I mean, you can't find a name, So I came up with the narrative mindset, found it, and looked it up, see does anybody took this name or whatever. And then I had to do the research on what a narrative mindset even was. So, the narrative mindset is just it's just a story. You tell a story so that somebody else understands it. And from then on, it makes them a better person because they move on from, from your narrative way that you tell a certain situation. They apply it to their own life, and then it helps them move better in a positive way, creating a positive outcome. And that's what I'm hoping to do. I'm hoping that people can listen to my views on certain subjects and use it in their own thoughts and lives and things of that nature. And, you know, hopefully there's a positive outcome. Oh, it's never a negative outcome. So, here in the next couple of episodes, I will be, uh, I'll be starting from the beginning, basically the beginning of me, and going through that whole process and and having a little bit of conversation about it, and basically introducing my entire narrative to the world from start to present. And then we'll go into uh, just my views on on the struggles that I have mentally, and my narrative on those every day. So, like I said, I'm your host, Gerald Tabb, and here we go, introducing me to the world. So, to start off, from what my understanding, because I would, of course, I wasn't born. So, from my understanding, I was born, in Marshall, Michigan, and it started because I think my mother had told me that they were on their way to. My mother lived in Albany, Michigan, and they were on their way to. I think they were on their way to Jackson or something like that. Because you got Albany, Marshall, and then Jackson, and then you run into Detroit. So I think they were on their way to Jackson, and she was already, of course, already pregnant, and then went in labor, and she had to, uh, you know, go to the nearest hospital. It was in Marshall. Thus, I was introduced. I was introduced to the world. Thank God. So, uh, my mom's life, I think, would have been. I know her life would have been different if she hadn't have gone into labor, because, well, let me adjust that, because I don't think it would have been different right then, but because she was already pregnant with me. But I think The only thing that would have been different about it would have been my place of birth. That would have been the only different thing. I would have either been born in Jackson, or would have been born in Albion, Michigan, which is where my mother lived. And they're not far apart. I think Jackson is maybe an hour away from Albion, and uh, that said, it's not a huge difference. So I don't really think there would have been a big difference. Marshall was, like I say, Marshall is, I think it's maybe, I don't even think it's a half hour. I don't think. So Marshall wasn't really, it was, well, you know what? Marshall is a quick stop because I'm from Kalamazoo, Michigan. Albion is about an hour away from Kalamazoo, Michigan. Marshall is about a half hour. So, it's nothing to drive from uh, Albion to Marshall because it's only a half hour away. And as a matter of fact, I don't even think Albion, Michigan has a hospital anymore. So when you call 911, they have to come from Marshall to get you from Albion. You're probably dead by then. And then, if they can't figure out the problem, then they take you back to, uh, Marshall. Uh, my family, they really never ended up staying in Marshall because they were always in Albion because that's where they're from, Albion. And they're originally from down south, but whole family, my mother and my dad, were in Albion. So I think they stayed in Marshall. I don't really know because I'm, like I said, I'm just going off of what I pieced together through my life. So, of course, she has a child in Albion. They stayed here, long enough to have the child, probably a couple to get stable after you have a child. I'm not sure how long that takes, but I'm pretty sure they stayed there for that little bit of time and then went on back to where they were. I don't really feel a connection with Marshall because I don't really know anything about it. It's just the only way I know of Marshall is because it's on my birth certificate. But any connection, know anybody or hung out there, whatever, I have no idea. Absolutely none. Because there's nothing in Marshall that I can tie a memory to. There's just not, enough information that I can dig up to say, okay, I had a cousin there or a friend or a family member or a funeral or whatever. I've never gone back to see the place where I was born because I don't even know. I don't even know the hospital I was born in. I just know I was born in Marshall. That's it. Never had any reason at all to go back. So I've never been back and I've never had a reason to go back. So that was, a little bit different, a little bit different. But it, my mother, she never really told me. We never had a conversation about that. The only way, I think she might have told me one time I was born in Marshall when I was younger, and then as I got older, I saw my birth certificate, but never really a definite, sit down about, you know, the whole situation. Uh, they were on their way to Jackson. I'm not really sure who was with her. I think I want to say my dad, but I'm not sure because I don't know if he had been shipped off to Vietnam yet. So I'm not sure who was with her. I'm not sure how old my mother was at the time, because, like I said, we never had a conversation about it. I just know I heard her one time saying that she just mentioned one time when she was on her way to do that because I don't know, we never really had I don't know, those kind of conversations just didn't happen, and I remember talking to an older lady, Irene Downing, and I think she died when she was 91, I think. I mean, she was born around the time, uh, uh, she even remembers the Titanic, but at that time, she said her parents or grandparents never talked about anything prior to what happened. Because we all know, she was born in 1910 or something. We all know, what that conversation would have been like, but she said her parents never talked about it. So I don't know if that was just pass through generation to generation, but at least as far as my generation was concerned, we never really had that conversation of any of those things. Uh, being a child, in that particular situation never affected me because I really didn't know. I never knew, for it to affect me, you know. I mean, well, I'm not going to say I really never knew. I'll say I wasn't told about it till later on in life about, the why I was born in Marshall. So, uh, uh, my mother did. It was kind of funny, you know. We joked about it when she did speak about it. When she finally told me, because I was kept wondering, like, uh, how did I end up being born in Marshall? What was the whole story around that? And that was one of the times when she did tell me, and it was all in pieces though. She said, "Hey, we're on our way, the yada yada yada," and I was in labor, and we had to rush to Marshall Hospital, and yeah, it definitely was. We did laugh about it. A it wasn't a situation that uh what do they call it, it wasn't a situation that had any type of hurt to me. And it really wasn't anything to be symbolic about. It was just, she got, went in labor while they were on a trip, had to go to, uh, Marshall. Um, I don't think that story has anything to really do with my personality that I can think of. I just don't see how, her going in labor on a road trip would would be able to tie into anything in my personality. I don't that doesn't have any resemblance to any parts of my personality now. Uh, I never knew what hospital it was. I never grew up hearing this story from other family members because other family members didn't really, it was the same. I think they might have told their family maybe what happened, but, they never, my other family members never talked about anything that didn't happen, outside of their family. I'm not even sure if they even told their own family. I think it was the same. Being from Michigan instead of Alabama, number one, there was never any tension, but I think there was uh, some indifference, because you see movies about it and all kinds of other stuff. And at one point, I never knew that I thought my mother was too young to be part of the whole migration until I happened to uh, see her driver's license one day. And I looked on her driver's license, happened to see it's Alabama. I thought my mama was from Albion. I thought she was too young, to be part of the whole migration. So, knowing that there was no tension, but it did create more curiosity because now I'm wondering, okay, you see all these movies about slaves, about this, about that, about this, and then you find out, okay, my mom is from Arizona. Okay, so now I'm wondering, what did she do? What type of upbringing did she have coming from Alabama? And come to find out, they did pick cotton, they did pick berries, they did pick, you know, you know, strawberries, they picked whatever, because those were the jobs that paid, a nickel a bushel or whatever. She was never in the whole slave thing, but she did go out and do things. There were side jobs, just like we have now. It was just, I guess you would call it the kind of uh, the birth of side jobs. Because you could go uh, pick cotton, you go pick berries, you go pick whatever. Somebody had a farm, they needed somebody to pick certain things, so that they could get it to market, make a little bit of money, and then they pass you out a little something. So, I think when I was growing up, it was, we used to pick, corn. Definitely used to pick corn. I think that was, $8 an hour, corn tassels. Let me be specific. We used to pick corn tassels. And it was excellent because I've always been ambitious and I've always loved to work. So, when that $8 came through and it was like, for a kid, $8 a day, 40 hours a week, I mean, the whole neighborhood was on that bus going over there to that cornfield and you would they'd have a tractor. We ride on the back, on the side. And as you passing by, you just grabbing the tassels, grabbing tassels, grabbing tassels, you know, and even to some, even today, that would be considered hard work for the newer generation now. But back then, it was just like, got your lunch, got ready, and got on up. You know, I think my mother considered Michigan more of a home than Alabama. I never really heard her talk about Alabama, anything like that. I never knew my great grandmother. So that's another fortunate situation of today's kids, because today's kids, they know their mother, their grandmother, their great grandmother, and sometimes even their second great grandmother, if she's still around. So, but I never knew my great grandmother. And, like I said, I never knew anything about Alabama. So my mother used to always talk about everything I knew was Alabama, because my father was from Alabama. My mother, she was from Alabama. All of my mother, she had 6 sisters, 1 brother, all of them in Alabama. My dad, he had, I don't know, it might have been 5 brothers, all, and maybe 2 sisters. All of them were from Alabama. So everything I knew was, and at that, up until a certain point, was in Albion. My mother, I don't think she missed Alabama. I think it was just someplace where, you know, she knew she lived there. She knew they moved to Albion, but, she never missed Alabama. I've never visited Alabama myself. I've been to Georgia, Arizona, Pennsylvania, Ohio, uh, been through Kentucky and Tennessee, but just driving through Indiana, but never been to Alabama. My mother raised me with Michigan roots because I wasn't never been to Alabama. So it was 100% Michigan roots. Albion and Marshall are, well, like I said, Albion, is more, from what I know, Albion might be more of a white town. I didn't know too many people at that time from Marshall. Albion, surprisingly, as small as Albion was, there were a lot of black people in Albion. The person who is my best friend, who passed away, who was more of a father figure than my own dad. He was from Pennsylvania, Aliquippa, Pennsylvania, but he came to Albion because of Albion College. Albion College was a great college, so he ended up going to Albion College, and he knew my Aunt Fats. Everybody from Albion, they had nicknames. I got an uncle, uh, uh, they call him Honey. My mom's, I'll tell you more about that further further in the story. But as far as Albion and Marshall, I never really knew Marshall, never knew too much about it. Albion was and still is, you know, almost like my second home. Uh, After I was born, yes, my mother was still in Albion because my mom and dad were from Albion, and then they ended up moving to Kalamazoo later on in life, but they were from Albion. So I grew up around my my aunties and uncles and everything. Uh, they were they were amongst uh spread out in Michigan, Albion, Jackson, Detroit. They were spread up or spread out around there. Uh, Kalamazoo. I'm so close with my cousins because I had like 4 or 5 aunties here in Kalamazoo. We used to love going to Albion because anybody in Albion knew my Uncle Honey, and his house, since they don't have much in Albion, his house was like the place to be, just a party house from start to finish. Ever since I knew, you know, everybody knew him. Definitely a fun place to be. But I had some other aunties. My Aunt Wendy, she was kind of a little uptight, kind of uppity somewhat. She worked at General Motors at the time. Had an aunt, uh, my Aunt Birdie, she passed. Uh, Definitely great person. Her and my mom lived next door to each other at one point in time. That's why I'm so close with one of my cousins, uh, my Aunt Peter up in Alamo Hills. Close. I was close with them because we went over there all the time. So, having, I think I was trying to explain to my cousin because she was stuck on the fact of why we have one cousin who was my uncle. He had a daughter, and she kind of felt left out. So she was trying to figure out, okay, well, why does she feel left out, and why wasn't she around, and all this kind of stuff. I said, well, you got to understand, sisters, they're always gonna go visit each other. They're always gonna go visit, their mom and everything like that. That's just natural for them, you know. So their children are always going to be around each other. With me and our kids are going to know our best friend's children because we're going to take them over to best friend's house. He got kids, they can play while we playing cards or whatever, and we still hang out, still be a father and still hang out because somebody else that we hang out with has kids. But more than likely, they're not going to really be too close with their actual family members because we're not going to go over there too much unless, the holiday, Mother's Day, whatever, whatever, whatever. So, now, the, the family is really spread out because, you have different opportunities, different things that they can be doing because we're evolving. Um, Having a mom with so many sisters wasn't, I don't guess it was I didn't really notice it growing up because all I knew was I didn't really think about it as sisters. I just thought about it as, this my auntie, this my auntie, this my auntie, this my auntie, this my cousin, whatever, whatever, whatever. We never really thought about, we were having too much fun, to really get into specifics because the economy was good. We were having fun, so we didn't really worry about, it wasn't time for us to worry about, uh, things that weren't fun, you know. Uh, my favorite auntie growing up was my Aunt Bertie. Was my favorite auntie because she was the nicest one. She was the most, like my mother, the most, forgiving, most this, the most that. Uh, my two cousins, Quita and Toya, my two of my favorite cousins, because I wasn't interested in sports. Got a brother, Michael. He's one of my cousins too, but he was more closer to my brother because both of them were involved in sports. I wasn't. So that's how they became close. Uh, my mom's brother, my Uncle Ricky, he really didn't play a role that I can remember. I knew him, and he was, don't get me wrong, he, wasn't a bad person. He, was around in the family, but as far as playing a role, he didn't play a role because he wasn't, you know, he was a guy. He was off doing his own thing. Family event happens, he's over, at my grandmother's house. I remember, being over her house and we in the back room playing. And that was my first time seeing, uh, Sugar Hill Gang. Sugar Hill Gang, the album version, because he had that. And that was my very first time seeing the Sugar Hill Gang album. I think Alabama upbringing, I think shaped us all. I think being from the Midwest, we were a little bit different, but, Alabama upbringing, most black people were from the South. So that original Alabama or down south upbringing, it is just in our DNA. We just moved up here to the Midwest because this is where the jobs were. So that was how we ended up here. So I think that through societal changes, the raising has evolved negatively, I think, in my own opinion. But the Alabama is the original, that's the blueprint for our raising nowadays. You know, anything you can trace it all back to the Alabama raising. Now, if the question was, what would you change? I would definitely change Alabama upbringing because I would definitely change Midwest to Alabama because Alabama is country. Alabama is horses. Alabama is trails. Alabama is land. Alabama is hard work. Alabama is family. Alabama is, just everything rooted in what I believe that an individual needs, especially us, that we need as far as just, that upbringing that just molds you into who you are. Well, I guess the only stories my mother had to tell was, when she was, uh, when I had mentioned picking cotton, and she quickly corrected me and said, we used to always, we pick cotton, we pick cherries, we pick this, we pick whatever. Whatever they was paying us to pick, we picked. So it's not like, at least in her generation, it's not like the movies tell. And, it's not like, oh, well, they the whole slavery thing and all that type of stuff. By the time she came around, it was more, it was more, uh, uh, more the last part of, you know, sharecropper area, just on the end tip of sharecropping where you had an option. If you want to make a little bit of money, you go, pick some shares or pick whatever, or do this and do that and make some money, which was, 5 cents back then, was nice. Cause I think back then, I think a Coke, costed a nickel. So if you can go make 5 cent a bushel, you pick, you pick 10 bushels, that's 50 cents. I mean, you were rich. And I think she also told me about, uh, she mentioned that my mother had some land that had oil on it that the family owned. But those were the only stories that she told from down south. My mother really didn't talk about, or, I mean, my mother is still alive. So my mother really doesn't talk about, um, down south. As far as cooking Southern food, I mean, we all eat Southern food. If you eat fried chicken, that's Southern food. If you eat greens, if you eat chitlins, if you eat, uh, sweet potato pie, you eat, all that stuff is Southern food, with seasoning and everything, all this stuff is Southern food. As far as Southern sayings, you know, we used to, I kind of speak a little bit Southern myself because I say auntie, and having to, we grew up having to refer to, uh, having to use the references, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, uh, grew up, having to be very respectful, which is a good thing. I don't really, not something I shy away from, but it's just something that I think through generational change has unfortunately gotten away from us. I'm not sure if faith was a big thing for her in Alabama. I'm pretty sure it was, but I know that here, you can ask most black folks. I mean, we lived in church. It was church Monday, Wednesday, Friday, sometimes Saturday. You know, most of the time, Sunday. So you had maybe Tuesday and Thursday off, maybe, you know. But I'm not sure about Alabama because my mother, she never really talked about Alabama. I never really noticed a difference between how people lived in Alabama compared to Alabama's family, except for the fact TV. That's TV is the only thing I know about Alabama. I mean, my mother, she even told me some of the experiences she had in Albion, because it was hard for black folks to to live anywhere because nobody wanted to rent to them. And like I said, I didn't think my mother was old enough to have experienced that. But come to find out she was. I'm not sure if my mother missed the slower pace in Alabama because I'm not really sure if, moving from at that, I think the time when she moved to Albion, I think it was pretty much, it might even been better because, you move from Alabama, which at the time was a uh, very racial environment to the Midwest, which was still a very racial environment. I'm not really sure there was a huge difference, but I don't really think at the time, I don't think she missed the slower pace of the South because in the Midwest, it was a little bit different, I think. My assumption, because I don't know, I think it was a little faster in the Midwest because that's where the jobs were. Down south, it was more farm. It was more, you know, depending on what family you lived in. Some of them didn't even. Some of them had to, uh, turn down school because they needed you on the farm. So I think it was a little bit different when she moved up here in the Midwest. I think Michigan was a fresh start because of the job. Well, you know what? I'm gonna take that back. I think it was a transition. I don't think it was more of a fresh start. I think it was a transition, but it was a slow transition to start with until she got a job. I think she worked at uh, State Farm. I think, but I think it was a it was a slow start. It wasn't a fresh start. It was a slow start. My mother raised me and my brother a little bit different than the way she was raised because we had more freedom. When she was growing up, it was just like, you had to, there was just certain things you had to abide by, certain rules you had to abide by, you know, and, my mother and my father didn't raise us with that whole, the strict, uh, guidelines that they were raised on, you know, So yes, she did raise us differently because it was a little bit more of a softer raising. My dad, he was, still a firm person, but for the the my mom, it was a little bit of a softer raising. Her sisters, they did stay in Michigan. I'm not. None of them went back to South. Not too many people went back down South until generations later. As far as family gatherings, it was when the matriarchs were still around, the actual grandmothers, you know, those were the center points for family gatherings, because everybody went to see, grandma, when it was every holiday, every, whatever, we were at my grandmother's house. And that was one reason why most of me and my cousins, that was why we know each other so good. And that's the reason why we I don't know my younger cousins, because with them, they weren't around. So there was no way for us to know each other. My daughter, she doesn't know my cousin's daughter. My cousin's daughter, she doesn't know who I am. I seen one of my cousins online, knew who she was when I first looked at her, but she has no idea who I am. Same with me. I have no idea who, my mother introduced me to this lady who she said was my cousin. I have no idea who that is. So the gatherings are more spread out now. But when I was growing up, the gatherings were, you know, all together because the matriarch was still around. Some of my mother's roots did clash with Michigan culture, as, most people will tell you. They'll say, hey, I'm from the South and we did this. We had to, you know, uh, say this, and we had to, do this with my mom and all kinds of stuff. I can't tell you the amount of stories that I heard as far as my mother comparing her upbringing to mine. And it was her upbringing was from her mom. My grandmother was from Alabama, so her upbringing was totally different than mine. And like I said, mine was uh, a lot softer than hers. But when people ask my mother where she's from, she says Albion. And I say, when they ask me, I tell them that she's from Albion. But when I found out that she was from uh, Louisiana, then my answer changed. They say, where's your mother from? Well, she's originally from, I found out she was from uh, there's one of them, Louisiana or Alabama. But, she's originally from there, but grew up in Albion. I've never felt like I was from two worlds because, I know, I'm from Kalamazoo. I don't even claim Marshall. I never, my mother never told me that Michigan changed her. Never really said that. She never really mentioned much about Michigan changing her. She did tell me one time that if you are from Alabama and you come up here to the Midwest and your accent is still, you still have a Southern accent, you've been here your whole life, whatever. She did say for some people that does seem like a bit of a laziness, because I'm not sure how a Alabama accent can adapt to a Michigan accent. Now, I'm really not sure what that mental natural process is. As far as me picking up a Southern accent, it was all because of laziness, all because of just trying to be something that I'm not. I'm from Michigan. I don't really have a a Southern accent. You know, some things that I may say may seem a little bit Southern, but that's only because I'm just being lazy. It's not because have any connection with with uh with you know down south, because I'm not that kind of person. I don't really just latch on to, we were slaves and from down south and this, that, and the other, and whatever. I just don't do it. I'm from here, and I latch on to my Michigan upbringing. I don't really take pride or the opposite of, the way I was born. Born on a road trip, whatever. I'm just glad I'm here. When we take pride in it, it's not a prideful thing. It's not something to put that puts a notch on your belt. It's, something that happens. And I don't feel that it had anything to do with my identity. Your identity is shaped around from your surroundings and the people that you're involved with, and the information that you are the information that you have access to. Fate had a little bit of a hand in me being born in Marshall, because who knew that she was going to go into labor at that particular point in time? Nobody knew. So you really can't say, okay, it was planned. So fate did have a hand in me being born in Marshall, because it was just it was a wild card. You're pregnant. You can go into labor anytime. You don't know when. It happens when it happens. My life would have been different if I had been born in Alabama, because I think it would have been different, because it would have been, I don't know, a bit more, the upbringing would have been different. I would have had more access uh to animals and nature, and I would have had more of a I think I would have had more of a tougher upbringing, because it's more, I think I would have been more manly. I think so. Because I would have had more, more of that farm raising, more of that, handling, hard work, and uh you know I think I probably would have been exposed to more males, more hunting, more this, more that. So it would have been much more of a uh, uh, manly personality. I think my origin, it was more amusing than anything. You know, you can add luck in there if you want to, because you can say I was lucky because, hey, I mean, everybody's lucky to be here. I'm lucky that they were able to make it to a hospital. I'm lucky that um that that it was a good. I was born healthy. I'm lucky that that the car didn't break down on the way there. I'm lucky they had a good doctor. I'm lucky that uh, it was a good hospital. So luck definitely had a huge hand in it. But I don't really think And I'm just amused by it also, but it's not really anything that I feel is had a direct impact on my life.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.